Our first guest tonight was performing his own concert pieces across the U.S. and Russia by the time he was a teenager. Educated at UCLA and Harvard, this musical wonder found his way into film composing, contributing a series of diverse and beautifully realized scores for films like Panic, Bubba Hotep, Frailty, Constantine, Bug, and War. His two latest works are for the films Alien vs. Predator Requiem and Rambo, the latest installment of the wildly popular Sylvester Stallone franchise, which opens in theaters on January 25th. It is a great pleasure to welcome a terrific musician and film composer, Mr. Brian Tyler. Brian, are you with us?
I am. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Good. I'm glad it worked.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We're great admirers of your work, and we're crazy about film composition in general on this show. So thanks very much for being with us. I understand that as you were growing up, you had a kind of an insider's view into the film industry through your grandfather, correct?
Yeah, I did. He was art director. It was a different kind of wing of the movie industry. But yeah, I grew up kind of hearing stories about him being on set and doing his thing on these kind of. He did a lot of the biblical epics like Ten Commandments. He's an art director for that, and then did a lot of the John Wayne films, and a lot of different films. Sabrina, there's tons of stuff. And
Roman Holiday, classic work.
Yeah, a lot of good things, and he was, he knew I was really interested in film. He taught me how to edit, film the old school way, moviola with, tape and the whole razor and all that. But at the same time, I was always a musician, always, kind of writing music. So doing what I do now is just combining my love of, what I gleaned from him and just film in general, being a film fanatic myself, and then combining it with what I naturally love to do, which is compose. Yeah,
but you play a variety of instruments. What was the first instrument you took to?
I'd say the first one was drums. Drum set was sitting around the house. My parents traded some speakers in for actually to have my older sister, to play drums. I was about 4, so they weren't really thinking that I was going to play the drums, but I jumped on them and just kind of went for it. Probably a year later or so, started playing piano, and then eventually the guitar and bass and just various other instruments, and just kept on. To this day, I'm still, learning instruments. My latest one, I bought a harp recently, so I'm learning the harp. So I just
well, that's a beautiful instrument.
Yeah, it's great. In fact, my harp debut is indeed in Rambo, for about 10 seconds of harp playing.
You use a harp in the Rambo score.
There actually is. It's the lowest note. It's kind of it's way down there, just kind of doing this really low pulsing thing that no one will ever hear. I just wanted to technically say that I played a harp on a film score.
Well, actually, that's something that's pretty unique about you too, is that you do play some of your own instruments in your scores.
Yeah, well, like Rambo, for instance, it's a massive amount. I'm playing all sorts of instruments from Thailand and from Asia. Probably a good 30 or 40 percussion instruments on Rambo. There's also things like the charango and these kind of dulcimers from Thailand, and all sorts of stringed instruments and bowed, kumbis, and kind of it's more exotic kind of instrumentation that isn't found in a traditional orchestra. So we can get that, since the locale of Rambo is, out in Thailand at first and then goes to Burma, we needed something to contrast that was kind of a little bit more of the, the locale to contrast also with the more traditional kind of what we know as Rambo music, which is trumpet and the orchestra, and then, of course, acoustic guitar, which is part of that the Rambo theme.
Right. And how important was that maintaining that original Goldsmith theme?
It was hugely important for me because, here's the thing. I got a phone call from Stallone. I didn't know him before I did Rambo, and kind of how it relates to the theme. We'll get there, but it kind of you need the story kind of strange how it happened. So Sly calls in. He calls my assistant. I had just seen Rocky Balboa on DVD, I think the day before, and I got in an argument with a friend of mine because I really liked it, and my friend kind of didn't. And I thought this friend of mine, he's actually a director, I thought he called in just with the Stallone voice. You know, like this is only hours later. He calls in kind of, I thought he was just giving me crap about liking Rocky Balboa.
Right.
And so he calls in, and it's actually Stallone on the line calling me because he was listening to my music, and he was writing the script for Rambo. He hadn't shot it yet, and he wanted me to do the score. So I pick up the phone, and it's, "Hey, Brian," and it's of course that famous Stallone voice. But I thought it was just someone impersonating him. I thought it was my friend, and so I kind of didn't really believe him. But it seemed the conversation was a little bit odd. You know, come into my office. It was very specific. So anyway, I did come into the office, the address given, and there he is. There's Stallone, and we meet. And the first thing he asks is, "Brian, if you score this film, do you think it's a good idea or not a good idea would you want to reprise the Jerry Goldsmith Rambo theme?" And I don't know if this was the deal breaker question or not, but I unhesitantly said yes, because I'm a complete Jerry Goldsmith freak, and I love the Rambo series, and to me it just wouldn't be Rambo without that music. And he said, "Great, I think that's the way to go. Can we get some of that percussive, darker stuff that you do in there as well?" And so we kind of took it, and I had to make it, we had to make it our own for this specific movie, but it's definitely in there, and it's a real Rambo movie,
It really is, and obviously it stands on its own with your magnificent work. It's a great score.
Thank you.
At the same time, and I've seen message posts on some of your pages from your fans that say thank you for maintaining that Goldsmith touch as well. And tell me about that Goldsmith score. Can you put it into words? What that single? It starts out with a single horn. That theme that he has for Rambo. What that expresses about that character?
Yeah, I think the great thing about solo, it's done on a solo horn and it's done on a solo trumpet. The idea is that this guy is a loner, he just can't seem to make it work. He's not accepted in society, all these things that we see from the very opening shot of First Blood. He's this guy that just is never able to kind of fit back in. And the same thing, the start of this movie of Rambo, he's on his own, he's doing his thing, and he just can't really relate. He can't really have relationships. So it's that lone solo instrument that it really evokes that the kind of disconnect he has, and the fact that he is lonely in a sense, and kind of the last warrior, and that holds true really throughout, and kind of you've all the way from First Blood. I think Rambo 2 really works to use that idea. Rambo 3 kind of we became more of a buddy film, which we kind of went away from, and Stallone wanted to go back to the tone of First Blood. And
right.
and so it was almost even more important to use the Rambo theme in this than it was in Rambo 3, in a sense. So anything soloistic like that seemed to just be really haunting and poignant for the character.
Yeah. In terms of where Rambo goes in this film, Rambo's journey, and in terms of your scoring work. Did you wait to write anything until you saw a rough cut, or did you start in the scripting stage?
Yeah, I couldn't really help myself. He gave me the script before they shot it, and it was really cool. I felt like I was getting a sneak peek at something that I had grown up with. Series. Yeah. Like, what's going to happen to John Rambo? Really, it's hard to separate the fan from the composer sometimes.
Absolutely.
So right away, I did start thinking of themes, and also kind of marking up the script as to where I thought that we could reprise the original Rambo theme and then kind of work in some new elements. The thing that's kind of different about this film is got a realistic aspect to it, in that you have this whole there's atrocities going on in Burma today, still, and it kind of almost, it starts off with newsreel footage. It's all real documentary footage, and so it's got, you kind of are thinking that you're just going in for this just ride, but there's a realistic element to it, and the fact that there's this kind of thing going on where all these people in Burma, these villagers that are just really minding their own business, are getting slaughtered right and left. There had to be a really significant other theme to the movie besides kind of the lonely, heroic Rambo theme. It just didn't. It didn't fit them. You know what I'm saying? And so, there's kind of this other theme in the movie that I wrote that could reflect where the story went, instead of trying to force kind of a theme that didn't work over those sections. So there's multiple themes in it, but they connect throughout the film in various ways, and they're kind of in a way they play off each other.
Yeah, they complement each other. I've heard interviews with Stallone on this film, and we've been trying to get Stallone on the show. We can't wait. But I've heard interviews with him where he's talked about the most difficult part of putting this movie together was just that, doing something that will satisfy the action fans, the hardcore action fans, and honoring something that is a real life tragedy. I mean, that's currently still going on.
Yeah, and I honestly didn't know a whole lot about it before I saw the first cut of the film. Even reading about it, I was a little detached.
Yeah.
In a sense, like, you read numbers, he kind of lists how many people are killed in this and that, and every year, and it's like, wow, that's tragic. But then once he showed me the first cut, and I saw the opening frames of the film are just one shot after another. It's unreal. Like, mass graves, children with, they amputees and macheted. I mean, it's just incredible the how violent and terrible it is. It really rocked me back, and then I started going on the internet and kind of trying to find out, how could this be happening? And it's kind of near Somalia-like, and it's and it's anarchy there, and I think Sly did a great job with taking something that is real, trying to kind of, it's not a message movie, but it does expose you to something that's real, and because of that, it feels kind of more jolting, the violence and the action, and it kind of hits you differently than it does in just kind of a purely fictional tale, and I had to kind of take that into account when scoring it. You couldn't do it. There was one time someone made a suggestion. I won't say who, and what certainly wasn't from anyone on the creative team, but an executive made kind of a suggestion that we do just like over this scene, the rock music. That was like, a big hit song from, a metal band or something. And it was like, whoa, I think you're missing the point here. If you do that, it's making light of it and kind of,
I think he got his wish on the trailer. I think they're currently playing that on the trailer.
Yeah, well, exactly. In your trailer, you kind of don't know what's going. You're detached anyway. You kind of just. But when you get in that movie, and if they would have done something like that or the movie, oh my God, it just would have been hideous. So
a little disrespectful, in a way.
Yeah, it really would. It's like, wait a minute, guys, but it's we've all, anyone that's working in this business, the day the executive comes into the editing room or whatever, and he's like, here comes the suit, and often when they open their mouths, something like that does come out, and the good thing about Sly is he's a really strong kind of force in the sense that not many people mess with him, and kind of what he says is final, and he wanted this to be purely score. The entire movie is score. It doesn't have product placement songs. It doesn't try to MTV out or anything like that. It's not that kind of thing. And even at the end, when the end credits come up, there was a lot of suggestions. Let's put in such and such rock song, and we go with the Rambo theme. And it just. I think that will stand the test of time more than something that immediately dates your film and also undermines the point of it.
Well, I'm hearing you speak about how you look at the content and kind of live inside of the movie in a way to start composing your themes. And it reminds we had Christopher Lenertz on the show last week.
Hey.
And
good.
yes, and he compliments you on Alien versus Predator. He wanted me to tell you he loves the score.
Oh, great.
And he was explaining the role of the composer, and he said that it's not just about being a great musician. You have to be a great dramatist as well. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think half of it you really have to have a kind of the film bug, I guess. You want to be able to tell a story through the music. It can't just kind of be lacquered on and become this sonic wallpaper. I think that's the danger sometimes. There's a lot of great writers that could write great music that are either in the pop world or the classical world, and then sometimes when they try to make the jump into film composing, it just kind of doesn't work somehow because they're not really film people. But I came from the side of before I was even scoring films. I would shoot short films and I would edit picture, and so I kind of somewhat have that line into what it takes to dramatically build something up and kind of the ebb and flow of storytelling, and that's something that I always like to really try to get from the director. When I'm working on a movie, what are they trying to say with this scene? I don't need to hear a director say, could you use D minor 7 with a viola? That doesn't help. It's more like, okay, this is what I'm trying to say in this scene, and could you steer it this way? And you kind of get the whole tapestry of the score, and once you step back and look at the whole thing and it really works, that's when you feel like you've done your job right. It
sounds like Stallone was a great collaborator, an ideal collaborator.
Yeah, no doubt. He understands what music can do in a film. I mean, you look at Rocky, and how that's so integral to the you can't separate it. And it's the same thing with Rambo. He really felt that music was going to be a big part of it, and he knew that it was it's like, handing off this important job to this guy, me. and he just had, there's a certain amount of trust that has to go into it, no doubt, and we just had to have that relationship where you say, okay, I'm trusting you to be the heart of this kind of movie, especially with his acting, which is very subdued. He doesn't emote a lot. Kind of the idea is Rambo's exterior is just like stone cold, but inside there's all this tortured emotion going on, and
like
the only way
the great
you could do that was with the music. So it was and also just stepping in for in the shoes of one of the legends, Jerry Goldsmith, that
was he one of your kind of film composition idols?
Oh yeah, no doubt. Major. I bought all the his records growing up, and then the CDs, and followed his career, and I mean, it was we've had lots of crossover over the time. Actually, I replaced him on the score for Timeline, which is really, really strange, because it's like he had scored Timeline originally for Richard Donner, and then was let go, and then I ended up doing the actual score, and of course, this is a guy that, before I was actually hired, I signed an online petition to get Jerry Goldsmith. I was angry, I was like, bring him back on,
Yeah.
I actually signed the petition, but then I scored Star Trek Enterprise. He did Star Trek as well, and then I did Aliens, which he of course scored the original Alien, and we kind of have this weird, link, and which is great for me, just because I idolized the guy as long as I can remember, since I was 5 years old.
I want to ask you, before we let you go, I want to ask you about some of these other collaborations. There's a few directors that you work with on a kind of a regular basis, and I wanted to know what makes these collaborations special for you. William Friedkin is one. Yes.
Friedkin is, he's a guy that, I mean, he's like a legend, and he's got a whole personality onto his own that's pretty famous and infamous, So for me, we've developed a bond somehow. He's never used composers over and over. He always kind of has moved around his whole career, and we kind of hit it off in a way that now we work together on all of his movies. And there's a huge age gap, and all this, but somehow, we're kind of the odd couple, and we totally get along, and we're coming from completely different, angles, but he's someone that feels that music is incredibly important, and it's where we meet, philosophically on a film, and there's nothing better than kind of being able to talk to the director about, so what was it like directing Exorcist and such and such. And it's insane, just such a history there, and he's directed some of my favorite films, and even some of the ones that are considered failures are some of my favorite films. So it's pretty cool, and the guy knows his stuff. I mean, he in his spare time, he goes and he directs major operas,
yes.
when he's not filming movies. So that's someone that we'll keep going.
There's another director that you've worked with on both of his films, and the films couldn't be more different, but they're both just so exceptional. And I'm talking about Bill Paxton.
Oh yes.
With Frailty and The Greatest Game Ever Played. What is he like as a collaborator?
Bill is he's one of those guys that I think he can direct pretty much anything. And I think that's what he was trying to say after Frailty, is doing a movie that was so different with The Greatest Game Ever Played, And I was kind of the same way. I wanted to do something completely different. At the time I did The Greatest Game Ever Played, this kind of pastoral Americana kind of score.
Sure.
And so it was cool to kind of, Bill being a second-time director by the time he did that, and I did his first film that was so dark and so twisted and tweaked that we were able to both go in a completely different direction. But he's a film historian. He completely, like, the stuff that we talk about is often films from the 40s and through the 60s, and that's kind of his area. And in fact, when he heard some of my music just randomly when he was trying to figure out who would score Frailty, and he called me in because he wanted to surround himself with Arnie Glassman and like in the cinematographer, all these guys that were old school, and he thought for some reason that I was like a 70-year-old or something. I don't know where he got that. When I walked in, he was shocked, that it was like me, this guy, and he's a little thrown back. But somehow he felt that maybe my music kind of had some of that feel, and so yeah, we're continuing on. We're working on something together that's a long time in the works. What he's doing with Tom Hanks, that's coming out in 2011, actually, about JFK. So
that's right. It's I read about that about the Oswald story and the
yeah. It's like it's pretty amazing, and it's going to be a pretty massive undertaking, but
I bet it will be.
Should be cool.
We spoke to you about 2.5 years ago, and we're really excited to have you back on the show.
Thanks.
Because we loved the Rambo score, what you came on for before, and we loved the score to Expendables as well.
And we love both films, so I mean, yeah.
My Sly films.
Yeah, you're So tell me about this, because you told me about first meeting Stallone for the Rambo project, and this is your second project together. Tell me about this collaboration. What was unique about this one?
Well, and they're quite different in that, walking into Rambo, it's a massive just responsibility in a way, because it exists. It's something that had pre-existing music. All the Jerry Goldsmith music was so amazing. Mm-hmm. And so you're almost walking into it's like bull in a china shop. You're just kind of looking around and not wanting to screw it up, in a way. And I had to really tread carefully even when I wrote new themes for Rambo, because it needed new themes. Just the tone of this last Rambo had certain elements to it that wouldn't lend itself to only using the pre-existing theme. So all of that was kind of nerve-wracking in a way, and I, as a fan of the Rambo series growing up and all that, it was kind of
this introduction to working with Stallone that freaked me out a bit. But I loved it, and the movie, I really thought it was cool, and I was really proud of how we used Jerry's score and also the new themes I wrote. But with Expendables, Sly calls me up and says, all right, clean slate here. We're going to create a whole new sound, a whole new thing. So it was completely wide open, and that was really exciting from my perspective because, hoping that it's a franchise. I don't know. It may continue. I hope it would, just as even a film fan. I would love to see more Expendables-ness.
Yeah.
But, it was kind of something that as you go, you realize, wow, this could be something that lives on, so I better do a good job with it, So I gave it my best.
Well, it is one of the most rousing scores I've ever heard. And I was re-listening to it today, and it made me not feel like such a geek. It made me feel like a tough guy. So you've done a great service for me.
Yeah, you have. I mean, obviously, you're going to be coming back to this because, Stallone had talked about, I guess, last week in several interviews that he would love to do a sequel. And I think after this weekend's success, I think that's a given.
I think so. I just saw him. When did I see him last? I saw him, it must have been Thursday night. And we were over dinner just kind of talking about things, and one of the things that, he was talking about some of his ideas, and they're really awesome. He's never short of having ideas, and there's so many things that he didn't do in the last film that he could have, but also just the way that it's set up now from this first film, it could be really, it could go into so many different areas, but I think he's got the right beat on it. And, the cool thing about Sly being the star and being kind of an icon and a director and a writer is that, what he says goes. No one's going to really mess with his vision. So it kind of either flies or doesn't based on what he feels would be cool, and I think there's no one better that has a pulse on kind of what the Expendables are all about than Sly. He's so close to really being that in a way.
Yeah.
So hopefully it will,
Tell me when you came on this project, at what phase, and when you first started to hear the musical voice of the film, what were those sounds? Where did they come from?
There were a number of things that came to me at first, just having read the script and talking to Sly as he was shooting. And because just like Rambo, I was on board before they shot the film. And so when he was down in South America, and they're down in Brazil shooting, there was kind of the mention of, well, why don't we use a little bit of flavor of South America, which did make its way into the film for sure, but it wasn't really the predominant thing. What ended up kind of as we went being the predominant factor in the film was, big muscular orchestral themes, and in a way the film is a throwback to action films that existed without giant robots or creatures. It's just the main feature is human beings in camera doing stuff, and blowing things up and having real fight. You really feel the visceral, punch in the face kind of that the Expendables brings, and I think people were missing that. Everything started to feel so green screened, and where every characters didn't even exist anymore. They're just and there's something to that. There's something that you can do that's amazing on other worlds, like Avatar is incredible and what they can do. But I think there is a yearning also for kind of a big, rousing film that's shot, on film, and that you can see people with. So musically, I think we wanted to do the idea was to do a throwback in a way as well, where you have horns doing the melodies and kind of in the ways that a lot of the 80s movies did it. And so in a way it kind of tied back again to Jerry Goldsmith and that ilk, and that the
big, muscular, orchestral score that doesn't hide in the corners, which he never really wants. He always wants music kind of up front and center that
drive the action. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Drive the action, and something he always mentioned too is that he would call me up from his car. He's driving around, and he'd say, "Hey, listen to this," and he'd play something. Sometimes it would be a requiem, or sometimes it would be, something. And he really wanted to make sure that there was emotion in the action, and that you always want to. I think in a film like this, it would be kind of a knee-jerk reaction, and this happens in a lot of action films, is to have all energy and no heart. And so the cool thing about, if you look at his most iconic roles, they're paired with emotional action music in a way, like Rocky. Right. Mm-hmm. That kind of gonna fly now thing. Even though it's action, it has like an incredible emotion to it. Mm-hmm. When you're running up those steps and you're doing your thing, it kind of gives you that. I think that's why it lasts so long. The same with Rambo, it has a lot of emotion. So I wanted to make sure that was the case with this music as well.
Well, you've had a few collaborations, repeat collaborations with the same directors, and I think we discussed William Friedkin and Bill Paxton the last show.
Yeah.
And now with Stallone, is there a benefit for you of working with the same creative people time and time again? Or?
It is. I mean, you get to know them and you get to trust them, and they can be very honest with you, and vice versa. I can get it going there and say, this is really what I think, and do the good fight without being worried about, gee, what are they going to think of me? I don't know them, And Sly, I got to know socially as well as, in a kind of a professional manner, that it made it so we could easily just talk about things. And if he wanted something different or, whatever it may be, that was the case. And certainly on Expendables, much more so than on Rambo even, a lot more so, he really trusted me to kind of set me free to do my thing. It's like, Brian, go do the score. I trust you. Here's what I'm looking for, so do your best, And that's basically what it was. And so things, and there's other guys I work with over and over. I have Justin Lin, I think I'm not sure how many films we've done now, maybe 4 or 5, something like that, since 2006. And now we're doing another one, or another 2. And there's Jonathan Liebesman. I'm doing Battle Los Angeles right now, and this is our 3rd film. And these are all friends, now.
Right.
They're the people I spend the most time with, day in and day out, are really directors, and my music team. So my close circle of friends are really those people. So on something like this, it's really beneficial because you're trusted with something that really is kind of, it must be scary from a director's perspective, honestly. I mean, you're handing off your movie to a composer.
Yeah.
It's like sending, a child off to kindergarten or something, I guess. It's like you're like hoping for the best, but it's kind of out of your hands as a director, except for kind of describing, could you do a little bit of this or a little bit of that, and so that's why these repeat collaborations are cool, because you already know that there's something there's a common language, and there's already trust built up.
This might sound like a silly question, but you mentioned the kind of the nervousness of the director giving his baby up, and I would think that that goes with the screening process too, and the big premiere that the Expendables had, and
yeah.
I would think that they'd be on edge, hoping that it plays well. You as a composer, when you attend screenings and such, do you feel those same kinds of nerves?
I do. Screenings are incredibly nerve-wracking for me. I just, you want it to play just right, and all the things that you see in the film that you think are great, you're not sure if they translate. And certainly by the time premiere comes along and all the critics are there, you've seen the movie so many times that it starts to get hard to have any distance.
Right.
I mean, I think the people that have probably see the whole film the most out of anyone on the planet would be director, editor, composer, because actors don't really see the film as it goes. They just do some ADR, and sometimes they don't even know how the movie ends. As I was talking to some of the Expendables, they kind of know their part. The actors sometimes aren't completely aware of how the movie was edited in the end. or the other scenes that were shot with that they weren't in, and movie executives see it a few times or whatnot. But every single scene in this film that I score, I probably watch each scene at least 200 times.
Wow.
So by the time I get to the premiere, it's kind of a sum total of 200, 300 times that I've seen the movie, at least. And so it's like, you've memorized it exactly.
Right.
And it's very hard to tell. But with Expendables, the thing I try to hold on with, actually with any movie, but definitely with Expendables, is the first time that I saw it when Sly just showed it to me in his office. And I kind of jot down my feelings about what it is. And even though it improves and the movie gets better and all that, you kind of try to hold on to that first feeling. And then it's always a relief when you go to the theater and they react well, and
right.
you never know. I mean, it is hard to tell. It's weird. I just found out yesterday. We were looking at, I was kind of trying to think, gee, how have films that I've scored, how have they fared, and how do people react to them? And I always tend to think, oh gosh, I don't know, did people like it as much as I did? But it's been pretty good. 6 out of the last 8 films I've scored open to number 1. One of them, Law Abiding Citizen, opened to number 2. So it's like kind of, it seems like that people hopefully see what I see in it. But there are times where I score a film, and I get signed on. Sometimes very early, like on Expendables, before they shoot the film, and sometimes it just doesn't work, and it's a complete dud, and there's nothing you can do about that, but you still give it your all, and you try to improve the movie with the music as much as possible. But I'm just glad that the Expendables was kick-ass before, I was even writing.
Well, but you can tell that your score is working with an audience by the way the movie's playing. I mean, it's such an essential stitch in that fabric of that experience. So, and I would think that particularly with something like an action film, a bad score could really hurt the experience of the movie.
Totally. The thing that you do see, and something that I noticed with Expendables and now with Battle Los Angeles, is that you get a chance to see it both ways. We did screenings of the Expendables when it wasn't my music yet. They were just temping in it was my music, but it was music from other films that I scored. It was like Eagle Eye and, other things like that thrown into the movie just kind of as a Band-Aid until we get to the real thing so we can at least see how people react to the film. Well, you can just see how you see it then, and then you see the real score after it's done with all the themes and all the connections and all the subconscious things that a score does, like when, the camera pushes in on a character and you're playing the theme of the person that character is thinking about, So those are things you just cannot do with a temporary score. And all those things add up to a greater experience, even if it's kind of on a subconscious level. And I've seen that over and over again. So, you always want to bring that custom, thematic vibe to a movie, because that's why I believe in thematic writing so much, because if you kind of just follow the energy of the film and you don't establish kind of the old school themes, you're essentially just rewriting a new temp score, in my opinion, at least.
Right. I prefer the thematic material too.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of action films. I mean, you've done films all across the board, but quite a few action films. Is that a particular challenge to work as much as you do in that genre and keep it fresh, keep the sound fresh?
It is, and it's exactly why the reason I try to move around a bit. And you don't always necessarily have control completely over your own schedule in a way, because there's people that I just will work with because I have loyalty to them, and if a few of them do a few action films like in parallel, then I end up scoring a few action films in parallel. The cool thing about films, though, as opposed to writing or composing in a medium or really any kind of career, the thing that I enjoy is that the scenery changes every single time. I mean, the fact that there's different actors, it's a different movie, a different story, that immediately changes the way I write. it's not as much as it would be if let's compare a romantic comedy and, like an action film. Those would be clearly different, but there are tonal differences, between a movie like Constantine that has kind of a gothic horror element and, let's say Fast and Furious. They're just, they're different enough that that I'm worlds apart in terms of how I kind of think of the movie musically. It's more difficult if you have very, very similar movies. I just haven't had a lot of times where I have one bleed into the other. I've kind of been lucky where I'll follow a Fast and Furious with, like Dragon Ball was right next to Fast and Furious. It was right next to, Lazarus Project or something kind of small like that. But then you have movies like Eagle Eye being very different than Law Abiding Citizen or Middlemen, and Middlemen being a very kind of subdued, dark, kind of surreal score really was, I think I was doing that around, the Expendables and that came around, I think a week apart or something like that. So you always want to, if you had your choice, you would want to have movies vary from movie to movie. I suppose the tricky thing is when you just have one after another that's in the same genre.
Yeah.
But I try to avoid that if I can.
Well, you do a great job. I love your scores. Like every single one I've listened to, I have on repeat. Rick, did you have a question for Brian? Or?
Actually, he answered it along the way, so I was going to ask you.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fun. No, I'm glad you did.
I'm hogging the questions. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's cool.
I wanted to know, because we didn't discuss this last time you were on, about your influences. What drew you into film composition?
Yeah.
When did that start happening? Because I believe your grandfather was actually in the industry as an art director, right?
Yeah, he was. It kind of skipped a generation. My dad followed in his footsteps in terms of the art side, but he was a great artist and became an architect, but, kind of shunned the entertainment industry. So by the time I, was of age to enter the film industry, the kind of, all I really had left were the stories that my grandfather had told me about it before he passed away. But, it started pretty early on for me in my own travels as a kid. I would say probably it started with Star Wars. It just was such a massive impact for me as I was very young when it came out. But Star Wars, and then I was a little more cognizant of Empire Strikes Back, and just that whole series and the early Spielberg films. All those John Williams scores captivated me, and I was kind of just a complete fan, and I would listen to the scores over and over and kind of imagine the movies in my head, and this is all as a young musician as well, and I was learning my instruments. I was playing drums and piano and picked up the guitar, and just kind of one thing led to another, so it made sense in a way that when I started writing music, which I was also fairly young writing music, it kind of had a film music sound, I suppose, just because the influences I had were so strongly towards film scoring. And then I got, maybe early teens, I really got into Hitchcock films, and then so was the Bernard Herrmann scores, and then of course all the sci-fi stuff. I loved all sci-fi as well, so it was just a sci-fi fest of scores, like everything from John Barry's Black Hole score to Tron and like Dark Crystal was on the heavy rotation, and it was all these kind of these movies put together and got smushed all in together in my head. That's where I learned to write music. So it kind of made sense in a way now that I look back on it, that even though I went and I started writing things like concertos and whatnot that had nothing to do with films, it took a long time for it to come back around, and I realized, wow, I could actually maybe do this.
Right.
And really, in a way, my love and my hobby of films and movie music became my career.
Do you find that you listen to other scores, still, like
oh,
you
yeah.
used to when you were?
Oh yeah, I'm constantly.
Which composers do you like the most?
Oh gosh.
Lately.
Yeah, I would say, oh God, what do I listen to? I'm pretty much, I get everything that comes out.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's not only scores in a way, because, as a drummer growing up, it was, everything from Rush to, Steely Dan to, it's like all the influences of my parents, being like they're really into like soul and R&B and stuff like that. So the drums were kind of in the rock and pop and R&B area.
Right.
So I have this massive, I love all that music, and my iPod's filled with it. But at the same time, scoring was going along, and that's why I kind of sometimes jump back and forth from working in more rock-oriented stuff than more classical-oriented stuff. But in terms of the composers, I mean, everything from the old school with Alex North and Maurice Jarre and Dmitri Tiomkin and John Williams and Bernard Herrmann, Jerry Goldsmith, up through Michael Kamen. I was really into the Highlander and all that, which is pretty wild because Justin Lin is directing the new Highlander, which we'll be working on. And it happens
full circle.
Yeah, it is. It happens over and over too. It's strange. Yeah. James Horner, I loved Wrath of Khan was like, and Aliens. Love, of course, Ridley Scott's Alien, but the Cameron stuff, The Abyss, Alan Silvestri, Predator was just like all of this stuff, and it's really strange if you look at. I've scored and I'm a huge Trek fan, like every single Trek series, every single Trek movie, like know all those scores, know all the episodes, just complete fanatic about this stuff, and so I ended up scoring Trek on Enterprise, a couple episodes, the Borg episode, which was badass, and then, obviously Rambo I grew up with, so got to work on that. Alien vs. Predator Requiem, got to throw in Predators and Alien music together, and all these things are influences, but they're also things, so I'm kind of half fan, half film composer, and as I go, there's all sorts of, then the next generation came along after that, and there's James Newton Howard, loves Signs and Unbreakable, and, the Bourne trilogy with John Powell scores, and there's a lot of great. Elliot Goldenthal's really amazing. Love his Final Fantasy and Titus and Alien 3 scores, and I use a lot of his team. I mean, I could go on and on. But,
yeah, but it's good. So you're carrying on. You're like carrying on this tradition.
Yes. Oh, for sure. I want to keep it going, and also something that I really feel strongly about is that the orchestral tradition of having live human beings play music.
Right.
You just don't want that to be squeezed out of the fabric of filmmaking, just like I don't want to see green screen completely take over and CGI where there's no humans left. There's none of that. Even if we're talking practical effects as well, I really feel strongly that you want to keep a connection to having cameras roll and capture things on film in 3 dimensions. I'm a big believer in model work as well. I love when you look at Return of the Jedi and some of the sequences in that, there's something that has maybe a little bit more impact than if it's just in a computer.
I agree.
And
with that.
It's the same thing with music. There's kind of a trend to synthetic, and I think when you look back on things, when they're synthetic, a few years later, those things just don't hold up as well as the stuff that's done for real. Even though at the time you're like, wow, Lawnmower Man looked so real, and those green sequences.
Yeah, well, I mean, for the time,
Yeah, and you're like, wow, this is so much better than ever. And then, you cut to a few years later and you compare a film like that maybe to something that was just shot practically, and you're like, oh, okay, which one holds up? So, so I feel like even though we've come really, really far, and I'm going off topic because it's not just music, but people feel we've really come far with music samples and emulating orchestras, and we've come really far being able to emulate saber-toothed tigers and wolves and things like that with CG. I still don't think it's as good as the real thing, and so I'm always, when I talk to director friends, I'm always saying, if you can really shoot something that exists, do it. Save CG for things that cannot possibly be shot. But if you have a wolf running along, or something, or a tiger, or something like that, just go get a wolf.
Right. I agree with that.
So do I.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Hawks and you're bringing up a good point, and it's something that harkens back to the Expendables as well, because you're wanting to build this very muscular action score for a genre of film that was very popular in the 80s and into the 90s.
Right.
And music-wise, film music-wise in the 80s, there was lots of synthesizers coming into play, that kind of sound. So I would think it would have been a challenge to pay tribute to that and yet not sound retro, sound fresh and new.
Yeah, that is true. There were scores, even like some of the really classic film composers at the time in the 80s. If you think of like Maurice Jarre did Dreamscape, which was and it kind of had that sound of, and there's also Brad Fiddel's Terminator and Harold Faltermeyer doing the Beverly Hills Cop stuff, and some of that's really cool. And I mean, I can't say that I wasn't a huge fan of Airwolf, because I was. Alan Silvestri, I think, wrote that theme, which was all synth. But if I'm going to use synth, here's the I think the dividing line for me, just conceptually. If I'm going to use synthesizer in any piece of music, I want it to sound like a synth. I want it to be what it was intended to be, which is I don't like when something synthetic is trying to emulate something that's real and replacing it. So, if a cello or a clarinet or something like that, I would want to use the real thing because it exists. Whereas there's all sorts of really cool synth sounds, like with classic synths from the 70s and 80s, that sound awesome. They're amazing, but I think they should just be what they are and sound like synths.
Yeah, like you said, if you want a wolf, get a wolf.
Yeah, I agree.
Exactly the same.
I agree with it, because there was in the 80s and 90s, there's a whole series of CD compilations that came out where they did this. And they did this, and I don't know, I thought they sounded awful, personally. I mean,
you're talking about where they would
James Bond themes. And
and it was all...
it was awful.
Yeah, no, and you'd feel so ripped off, you'd be like, oh, wow, and you wouldn't recognize it. It'd be something like the Gilaldo Symphony Orchestra, with a little asterisk next to it, and it's like, actually, Ball Snack Lightyear Mr. something or other guy that plays, his synths, and you get it, and you're like, okay, this is going to be really cool. I haven't heard the Dragon's Lair score in forever, and there's going to be Moonraker in there as well, and it's like, and you feel ripped
off. It was awful.
Whereas at the same time, I love, for instance, the band Kraftwerk. Well, they're all synths, but they don't hide it. It's meant to be that in the first place.
Oh yeah, Kraftwerk for sure.
Yeah, and Yellow and bands like that are Depeche Mode. They're awesome, and
they're incredible bands.
And it's just that it's by design. It's that way. It's when you take something that is meant to be human and go and invert it. So I think this is something that goes for all aspects of film, really.
Yeah, but one that always stands out from the 80s, and that's Jimmy Page's score to Death Wish 3, I think.
There you go.
I mean, that's just out of left field. I mean, that's so out of left field.